Y is recorded in front of a live studio audience.
But he's not a.
Yeah, have you guys seen the film? Are we ruining it for you?
Yeah, totally ruining it for him.
Okay, sorry.
1987.
Yeah, if you missed 1987's My Demon Lover, starring Scott Valentine, we apologize. So, Zach, welcome.
Thank you. Nice
Yes, okay. You sound
You can take
underwater. Is it the mask or?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're trying to be safe.
Go. Much better. I know, I understand.
So they can. You can each tip your mask when you speak.
Yeah.
So do you? And then you can put it back up.
So do you guys normally wear?
I've been yelling at them all day to
make sure. Are you wearing them all day in your place of work?
Yeah, most of the time.
Okay. Are your desks close together? Or are you just sharing one chair? What's the deal?
Basically.
Okay, gotcha.
We can spread out, but it's Zach's second date, so we didn't want him to be like banished to the out there.
Closet. Yeah, fair. I think that's fair. So Zach, Randy's really shown up in a major way here with the show. She's gotten us oh my God, let me look through the list. She's got us beekeepers. She got us waxers. She got us racers of several types. What are you going to do for us?
I guess I'll find some special guests too. Or
thank you. Perfect. Right answer. Yeah, no, that's good. Excellent. How are you on Land Before Time trivia? Have you seen that film?
Wait, say that again?
Have you seen the film Land Before Time?
No, I wouldn't have.
The dinosaurs.
What?
Oh, Randy, don't act better than him, okay? You can just tone it down a notch.
Suddenly I finally know one of them. Let me.
Well, no,
only because we talked about it last time.
Let's just stop looking down on others, okay?
This is Why, with your hosts, Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling.
Zach, what about Family Ties? The classic 80s sitcom Family Ties? No. Mallory Keaton?
Do you know how much?
Meredith Baxter Burney, perhaps? Yeah. Does the name Meredith Baxter Burney ring any bells for you? Okay, you're looking down. You look ashamed. That's good.
I feel like I should tease people.
So, okay, all right. So I'm not going to ask you if you have any Justine Bateman fan fiction to share with me or the rest of us. But welcome.
Do either of you know any Batemans?
Oh God, this is
Zach,
getting worse.
You know a Bateman.
It's getting worse.
Yes,
Heidi.
A famous Bateman.
Patrick. Don't say Patrick.
Oh, but that would be awesome if that's what he came back with.
I was gonna. I swear I was gonna say that.
No.
You know who Patrick Bateman is, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Randy,
right.
Do you know who Patrick Bateman is?
All right, you're gonna stay in that.
He
room
also knows Justine's brother.
Yes.
Star of Ozark. And Teen Wolf 2.
Oh, oh man. Yeah, we got to get someone from
Randy.
Teen Wolf on the show. Yeah, Randy, get out a notebook, would you?
Right?
Teen Wolf 2.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thumbs up. Thank you.
Got it.
All right.
That's TOO.
Yes.
It is. That is exactly it. Randy's looking at me like, really? I'm like, no, it is.
Yep. Look it up on Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you stand? Okay, Zach, I'm trying to think of other questions if this is the job interview for the show, such as it is. Do you respect Heidi?
Yes, I do.
Okay, that's not going to work out for us. All right, so you can get us guests. You respect the co-host and producer. All right.
What would you like to see on this show?
Oh, that's a good one.
I guess anything really. I mean, just anything interesting. Anything like I don't know, like some fun. Who knows? I don't.
Okay. Oh, you want
Maybe
fun? Okay, Randy, write that down. Zach wants fun.
Oh, yeah. Let's just go. No, this is
That's
fun.
FUN. How'd you get into making the film? I mean, it's sort of when you think of rock bios, Chuck Berry's got to be one of the first people that comes to mind, someone deserving of one.
Well, I don't know whether you know, I have made feature documentaries for some time.
Yes.
And one of those documentaries I wanted to do was Chuck Berry. Before he died, I was in New Orleans, and my security and our crews and everything else that happened to be out shooting something else put me off going down to St. Louis or up to St. Louis or whatever. And because they didn't think it was a good time and that Chuck was quite dangerous. And I had no idea, other than the fact is that I'm sure he could be quite dangerous or could have been, but got called back to the UK, and extraordinarily enough, he died. Now knowing what had happened after the fact, that he was bedridden for a good 6 months before he died anyway, it wouldn't have been possible. So, and I think after knowing what I know, I don't think it would have been possible either, even if he was still alive, to have made a documentary. Now, the fact is, the reason I wanted to make a documentary was because Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll was a very good concert review to me. It lacked the real documentary side, and it was showing Chuck in a sort of way of being fairly self-destructive. And I basically thought, this doesn't make any sense. Well, of course, now having gone over and been told the real story, it was exceptionally down to Chuck that he was being self-destructive. I mean, you know, the studios that were making that film started at 80,000 for his participation, and ended up paying just under $1 million. Because every day they wanted him to go and rehearse something or do it. It was a day rate, and he just wouldn't go on set. So it was really a bit of a problem. And rehearsals for the show, that came down to the fact that he needed to be paid cash, by the way, upfront in his own backyard to a certain extent. And so everything was money, 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 money. And people got upset. The producers got upset, very upset, because every time he walked out there was a problem. And there's enough problems making film under normal circumstances, let alone when your main man is saying, oh, no, I have to have a new contract signed. The time's got to be set aside and then checked over and, what have you. So it took a long, and Keith Richards was down there anyway, and Keith was trying to do the show and trying to get it right. And any moment they thought that Keith was going to have enough of it and walk off. So the fact was, it was a very strained situation. Now, when I got down there, the first time, I met up with the lawyers and managed to get an agreement put together to make the documentary. And that's how it all came about. And I met Thametta, his wife, since they were, I don't know, in their teens, 20s, of being together, man and wife. And she was obviously grieving, but I managed to get the only interview that she's ever done.
Wow.
So that is what we based the film on. Why did I want to do it? The reason was that Chuck Berry, to me, was the king of rock and roll.
Yeah. Why did Thornetta grant you that insight? What was it about you or your interactions with her that made her say, okay, I want to talk to you and you're the one to tell my husband's story?
I don't know. I think I'm quite good with people, especially from the music era. Whether they were directly involved or not. Of course, she was directly involved, but I think that she liked me, and I think she felt that I wasn't going to run down. One of the family's biggest concerns was that he would be run down when he died.
Well, that's one of the things I really noticed in your film was that I felt as a viewer that you really did a beautiful job of walking that line of not sugarcoating his issues. They were there. You were real about who he was, but yet you also showed beyond just the talent, the humanity of him too, and the beautiful sides of him. And I think that's a really, really difficult thing to pull off.
Well, thank you. But I have to tell you that was... See, when I make a film, a documentary, I believe documentaries, just as feature films or storylines or whatever you want to put, have to have passion. It wasn't just reporting that he sold that many records and he basically drove a girl over the state line that was underage. It wasn't the Mann Act result. It wasn't the police raiding him and stopping him from basically screwing up relationships with the authorities. It was more like, well, hang on a sec, the most important thing that this man actually wrote songs that everybody looked to basically help the theme of rock and roll and the creation of the teenager adoring it, and getting other artists that were making the way forward, like the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, every rock band that was out there, I think had a Chuck Berry song in their roster. And, it was something that people could relate to. And to me, and it probably to you, when you look at that period of time, you think of cream soda and jukeboxes and hamburgers and American cars and everything, that basically represented the youth of America after the wars. And, it was exciting. It wasn't brown. In the 50s in the UK, everything was brown. Everything was dismal, grey, and it was because we'd had 2 world wars, and it became dull. It became like English weather, like other than a couple of months a year. But it was dull, and in America, it wasn't dull. In the early 50s, we didn't have refrigerators. Mm-hmm. And when you wake up to that, and you suddenly think, well, what the hell did you put your food in? And, there were 2 refrigerators in American households. And, the thought you'd ever have more than one vehicle, that never came to people's minds. But it was a different age. And then you had this poet, which Chuck Berry is, writing communications and writing words that he made up, basically. So I'm sure that those words weren't in the Scrabble dictionary. And somehow teenagers related to it. I really think he created the teenager, actually.
Huh. Yeah.
It's interesting. You show in the film really well the fact that his songs lyrically are simple and, like you said, have some add some words to the vernacular, And then you have this great clip of Paul McCartney talking about the fact how hard it is to write that simple. Do you think this was something that he worked at, that Chuck Berry worked at, to make everything that simple and clear and tell such a perfect story through the song? Or was that just an innate gift that he had, that he could just do it without really thinking about it?
Well, I'm sure that he was gifted with that.
Mm.
I don't think he sat down and wrote songs like constantly writing songs, thinking about lyrics and thinking about this chord and that chord and this. And I think he was talented musically and given a gift of being a talented musician too. I mean, he played that guitar really well. And he basically made it as simple as he could. I mean, don't forget the Beatles were recording 3 chord songs for most of their early time, and so were the Stones. And you've got to think about American music, which was mainly R&B at that time, coming from blues. I mean, we have a different take. We weren't influenced enough in the 50s with the blues. Most people know in England what the blues were.
Mm-hmm.
And we were picking up, I mean, certainly the Beatles were, the Stones were. I mean, Ringo said to me that he would be standing by the ships as they were coming in from America in Liverpool, and he knew the sailors, and he would go and basically buy off them the little 45 singles released for jukeboxes in the South. And I know a lot about that because I made the B.B. King film and Monochrome, which is a series on that. And the fact is that he said, yeah, we got one, and we ran around and we played with a group or whatever it was, and we were hearing blues coming through, R&B and blues coming through. And, you know, that relates to all the say-sos about the Rolling Stones. When they first started, you picked up their first album and you looked on the back of it, and it was bury this, bury that, bury. I mean, you know, and I think that means they were fairly into Chuck Berry.
I think that's a fair assumption.
You assume that. And I think that, sure, we would have a Rolling Stones now if we hadn't had a Chuck Berry, but it wouldn't be what you think it is.
Right.
It would be something else. And, you know, if you study carefully the Elvis Presley career beginning, and you look at that, I mean, Elvis never wrote anything. And, you know, it was business deals. If Elvis recorded something, the Colonel had insisted, and his team, I mean, I knew his publisher very well. And he was a wonderful man, and he basically would arrange for Elvis to claim and be able to claim for the B-side of that record, but he never wrote it. And so that's Elvis was there, and Elvis influenced the Beatles, seriously influenced the Beatles, and many bands that I know and artists I've represented have all said, I want to go and see Elvis Presley in the early days, and managed to get there. And they said, oh, that's fantastic. But the thing was, what they should have been saying is, we want to go and see Chuck Berry, and they did. But he was fairly elusive, and he was fairly, he was into doing other things. Mm-hmm. And the other things were that he wanted to go and create Berry Park. And he wanted to basically do other things. He bought a theater, a cinema, and he started a nightclub. And the nightclub, when he came back from doing Bandstand in New York, he loved seeing all these kids dancing and having a good time. And it had something to do with going back and playing in clubs and small venues, which really was the only place that you could play at a certain level. And it was called the rope, and the rope went down the middle of the club. And on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the rope were white people, and on the right or left-hand side were black people. And black people didn't go across the rope, and white people didn't go across the rope. And if you notice at the early footage that he played, he would go from one side of the stage to the other, across the front.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason he did that was to mix black and white people. And he did. He actually managed to do it. And the police that were there, or the authorities that were there, couldn't do anything about it because the rope would come down. And it just is that if you watch the films very carefully, and I asked Ingrid, his daughter, who toured with him for 40 years, right? And he said that was the whole point of him doing that, was to mix the audience without appearing to mix the audience, right. If you understand it. Oh, you go over that side and you come on this side and they go over that, but which a lot of bands have been known to do, not necessarily because of the race problem, but other problems. Right. And there's always big problems about it, but he managed to do it very subtly. But then you see at the beginning with Chuck, they didn't know Chuck was black. He actually made the big step of crossing over from black radio to white radio. And there, these white disc jockeys were all playing white music, and they thought because of the way he sung that he was white. And they were very surprised when he turned up. Hang on a second, we've got a black man in here and we're just about to play his record, and we didn't realize he was black. And he was very responsible for, knocking down that old barrier that was quite aggressive at that time, and still is. There's no question about it. Yeah. Opening a nightclub in the middle of St. Louis, wasn't very clever, because what he wanted to do, it was the first time it was a mixed-race club, and they were out to get him, and that's why they got him on the Mann Act. Mm-hmm. I have no idea, I wasn't there, but, and I'm sure Chuck basically knew that there could be problems if he took an underage girl across the state border, and it was especially as she was known for prostitution before he did that. It isn't the cleverest thing to do.
Not really.
Because, it was asking for it. And
right.
When they got him. I mean, Charlie Chaplin got done for that,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
He was white. And he didn't go to jail.
No.
And that's biggest problems that Chuck had to fight for. He was black and he was an annoying person, and he kept popping up and causing the authorities to have a crack at him.
Now, you've had this absolutely marvelous career, and you have done so many things that people dream of, just having a smattering of the experiences you've had, from as a manager to making the films. And as you said, you've been in it. You've been in the room where it happens, the magic, all of it. What still surprises you about the music industry?
One of the biggest things that has surprised me in my life in this industry is the actions and the introduction of lawyers who, to me, I'm not saying that they're not creative, but to me, they ruined the industry because they came in and approached the industry without creativity. And those people, like myself, but there's lots of us, were pioneers of taking music and being able to take musicians from America and get them to play in England. And, there was a lot of this, of English musicians introducing black American musicians, and so on. And if you really think back, there were the odd exceptions, but England was definitely a springboard for musicians, springboarded into America, and vice versa. And once lawyers got involved in all of this, there was another way of cutting the cake. And the cake became, in certain cases, in certain cases, there was, it worked both ways, because promoters were taking far too much money, and, you know, they all got together and there was sort of a cartel, and they ended up getting 10% of a concert, and that was it. And no lawyer could change that. Bill Graham, all these people basically said, no, we have to have the minimum of that. We're not going to be an event arranger. We're going to create, and we're helping musicians get their music into the marketplace. Lawyers took over record companies and exploited the independents in such a way, independent record companies, in such a way that as soon as they were successful, flashed money in front of them, and they lost that personal little, you know, of giving to the industry, to developing artists. I mean, A&R, which is what everybody refers to as the man that's going to choose the song or help the artist make that record or whatever it is, doesn't exist today. Mm-hmm. And in a way, that's a terrible shame, because it's a question of dollars and cents. Can you bring us an album for that? And how does anybody know whether they can or can't?
Right.
And, you know, I don't think it was the unions. It was blamed on the unions to a certain extent, but I can understand why those bigger venues needed union venue to play properly at union venues. It's very, very, very much more expensive than. And suddenly, when it became union, and then became these lawyers in the suits, the record companies in the suits, and I think that was what I never understood, because the real managers got sort of lost. The icons are Ahmet Erdikans and Joe Smiths and Mo Austins and Walter Yetnikovs in this world went, and there's replaced by 2 to 3 attorneys or whatever it was, who had gone to Yale or gone to somewhere else and was given the chance of basically setting day to day, how can we cut down the distribution costs, until they slit their own throats by basically, you see it all around you now with the streaming and downloading and whatever it was. Now, eventually they'll come out, and they'll come out with profits. But the thing is that but they were buying. So to get anything done now takes 6 months in a record company, whereas they were releasing in the older days, you know, 2 or 3 albums per month, and being able to work on them. Now it's flooded. And, you know, it's flooded, and I don't think people and artists make enough money until they can get on the road and hold those big audience down. So to answer your question, I think that was the most extraordinary thing. Something what was it? Spike Milligan said, what in your career, when Spike Milligan, just before he died, they said, what have you noticed in your life that has changed? And he said, he said, there are too many people. And they said, what do you mean? He said, well, there's a lot more people around now than there was. Well, he said, when did you first notice that there were too many people? He said, when I got out of bed and bumped into somebody. He said, that was basically when I knew there were too many people. And that's really what's happened in this industry. It's been exploited and exploited and exploited. And I think it's sad
Yeah. One last question. I know we should let you go here, but throughout your career, from
You keep saying you want me to go, but I mean, I'm that fan of you.
no, I don't want to
We'll keep
monopolize
you here
your time. Yeah.
we'll keep you.
It's 6 p.m. in 6 p.m. It's gone past that now, but and it's time that one usually the phones quieten down, so we're all right. Don't worry about it.
So you've worked with a ton of artists, some of whom do not have the best interpersonal skills, shall we say? Looking at the film you made on Guns N' Roses, or your work, I mean, with the Gallagher brothers and the Fuji Festival, and you got Yes back together. Through all of this sort of mediation, is there anything you've learned that advice you could give any of us to try to get along better?
That's a very broad question. Look, we all know that what happened, and you have to relate to this, and it happened differently in different parts of the world. I don't know whether the most sought after band in Zambia was aware at the time of the 60s. I presume they have a band that was quite successful in Zambia. They didn't relate to the bands that were happening in the West, which was basically in LA. And they were different from bands that worked in the industry in New York. And they were different from the English bands. And I shouldn't think very many people in each of those territories knew what the other territories were doing. And that's what I started talking about earlier. Music is an extraordinary thing. It can be so powerful, it can stop a war. And it can be so powerful to create a war. So you had various bands happening think back, and you see these wonderful shows that were going on with 20 artists in the shows. They'd start midday and they'd go through to the night, and there'd be Mel Torme playing with I don't know.
The review shows.
Eric Clapton.
Yeah.
And there'd be basically pop, art playing. And you'd go there at the time that the band that you wanted to really see was coming on. And that changed. Because suddenly Eric Clapton and those big bands like Led Zeppelin, well, they came on later, but the Stones and everything were playing, Madison Square Gardens. And suddenly that related to success. Except that to me, the most successful music that I ever heard or performances were always played in little clubs. Don't forget America, jazz clubs in New York, or small. You think about all of those little places that basically were responsible for artists. Or you're reading a book on a certain artist started in the so-and-so club. Well, the reason you started in the so-and-so club was there were probably only 5 gigs that he could have played in that little part of New York or wherever it was. So what I'm trying to say is the fact is that all of these bands started learning off each other. All these artists started learning off each other. And you had the effects of festivals, because they were big events, started bringing around changes to people's lives. And, I think musicians started coming together and going, hey, pal, brother, we're doing this, and can I help you here? And can we work there? And you've got a mixture of people, American and English musicians mixing together, and suddenly a certain sound came out. We knew about sounds being separated because on the West Coast, they didn't have electric bass guitars, for instance. They still had the original stand-up basses.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Dylan was booed out when somebody walked out with an electric guitar. I mean, the band, Robbie Robinson was saying, you know, every night we got booed. Yet Bob Dylan, who opened the show and then came out and became electrified by the band, suddenly that changed everybody's attitude. People actually go in, pay for a ticket, and then boo the band. And, you know, you just think, so well, that's daft. But the day the Beatles came to England, to America, the day the sales of bass guitars went through the roof. People stopped, booked into a motel on the road just to see that show performance. And suddenly, then that became the norm. You know, you didn't often see a double bass unless it was in a jazz club, right? But I remember when I was managing Alvin said to me just before we parted to do something else. I came back to see him about 2 years before he died, and it was at the Royal Albert Hall. And I walked, literally as the show started, walked in and I saw a big double bass. Now there's a man that was so called, he wasn't actually, but one of the fastest guitarists, electric guitarists in the world. And there he had on stage a big stand-up bass being played by a bass player and the old-fashioned band. Why? Because that's what he loved. And he was trying to get that sound. It was to do with sound. And to this very day, I mean, I'm doing some work at the moment developing a film on Link Wray. And Link Wray is extraordinary because he's well known to every great successful musician. But if you ever went into a Ralph's or a supermarket over there and asked 9 out of 10 people who had ever heard of Link Wray, they would say no. And it's quite extraordinary that this man who had a hit in 1956, Jimmy Page said, I would never have picked up a guitar if it hadn't been for Link Wray. And so was other main players, Pete Townsend, another one. And you thought, why does everybody, these fantastic, successful musicians, right, adore and think of Link Wray as the godlike gift to us all, right? Know about him, and general commercial public don't. And that I'm filming this at the moment. I just think that probably answers up your question, because musicians are a cult together, and they'll never, it doesn't matter whether they're the most famous musicians or not, they're a musician and will always be respectful to each other.
Jon's documentary, Chuck Berry, the original king of rock and roll, is available to stream on Amazon. And you can follow Jon and see what other projects he's working on by following him on Twitter, where he is at Jon Brewer 301.
You can follow us on all the various socials. Our website is whythepodcast.com and has all sorts of additional stories and videos. It's also where you can sign up for our newsletter. We're also on YouTube, if you're into that kind of thing. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, because if you don't, we'll call your mother and tell her that she's completely right. You would look so much prettier if you smiled more.
Why the Podcast is part of Mudhouse Media. Today's show was produced by myself and Heidi Hegquist. Our reluctant executive producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our willing executive producers are Rachel Allen and Randy Jeanette. Our graphic designer is Samantha Mustonen. The theme song was performed by the Electrosynth-O-Magnetic Polyphonic Orchestra. This one's for Philippe. Thanks for joining us. Flash, We're coming home.
Nigel, is that you? Are you here, Nigel?